Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the mighty Jingles, and today's video sees the return of an old favourite. This is of course the mighty TOG II, the best tank in the game. Well, okay, it isn't. It's not even close. Not even close to being the best tank in the game. It is pretty terrible. But it's got character, and character will do. This is Stormin' Normans in a Tier 7 battle on the Paris map. And just look at that camo scheme. I'm honestly kind of torn. I don't really know what to think of the, well, do you get it? Look, you see? It's a hot TOG, isn't it? I mean, on the one hand, looking at that makes me want to pour bleach into my eyes. But on the other hand, I do think it's kind of cool that Wargaming have officially recognised that the TOG is a party tank. It's the tank that everybody loves. It's a morale boost for friendly tanks, and it's an XP and credit pinata for enemy tanks. And I'm kind of happy, despite the fact that looking at this camo scheme does make me want to pour bleach into my eyes, but I am kind of happy that Wargaming have officially recognised this tank's party tank status and given it an appropriate skin. Unlike a lot of machines in World of Tanks, the TOG is not a paper design. It was actually built. Might seem hard to believe looking at this thing, but it's absolutely true. One surviving example of the two prototypes that were made does exist, and you can see it at the Tank Museum at Bovington. What may surprise you is that this is not a First World War tank. They actually started designing this thing in 1939. The committee that was established to develop this machine were known as the Old Gang, and their initials, TOG, is where the name of the tank came from. Unfortunately, all the silly old doddering fools who were on this design committee didn't realise they were fighting the Second World War. Hence, this ridiculous looking machine. Which would have been ideal for crossing trenches, which is what the design committee thought World War II was going to turn into. Basically a repeat of the First World War. They were wrong. I love this machine. It's just so gloriously, eccentrically crap, and yet at the same time, also not. It has an absolute shit ton of health. 1,560 hit points, more than any Tier 6 or 7 tank. And it is equipped with a very, very nice gun. The 17 pounder is accurate, it has decent penetration, and a reasonably quick rate of fire. You really don't want to be getting into a DPM battle with the TOG II. Even if it misses half of its shots, it'll outlast you simply because it's got the health to spare. Also, to be completely fair to the real TOG, it wasn't a completely disastrous design. See, here's the thing, when you're designing a tank, you're having to compromise between three different desirable factors. You want the tank to have good firepower, you want it to have good armour, also known as survivability, and it's also very desirable to have good mobility. Now, it is possible, with modern technology and a shit ton of money, to achieve all three. Back in the 1940s and the 1930s, it was theoretically possible to achieve all three, but again, it was going to cost an absolute metric shit ton of money. Just look at the German Tiger, for example. It certainly had the armour, it definitely had the firepower, it sort of had the mobility, providing, of course, it had an extremely well-trained and disciplined driver who could be relied upon not to over-rev the engine during the heat of battle and render the tank completely immobile. But even if that was the case, the Tiger's mobility was, well, acceptable rather than good. Just going to take a quick break from the history lesson here to point out that the friendly artillery, the M12, there it is, Ally M12, lost in battle, just parked himself up against a wall, loaded the high explosive and fired it into the wall in front of him, killed himself with his splash damage. This, the M12 player, who, for those of you who've been paying attention to chat, has basically just been a sarcastic arsehole since before the battle began, proving that it was in fact him who was the team's weakest link. Scumbags gonna be scumbags. Anyway, back to the TOG II and some of the curious design decisions that were made during its development process. The TOG theoretically fulfilled 2 of the 3 criteria, and if you could get 2 out of the 3, you generally would have a good tank. TOG definitely had the firepower. The 17-pounder gun was excellent, and it kind of actually had the armour as well. For a tank designed at the time of the TOG II, it had extremely heavy frontal armour, 70mm thick. The problem was that survivability doesn't just mean armour thickness, and the TOG's mobility was disastrously bad. This was a 70-ton tank that only had a 600 horsepower engine. The TOG II only had a power-to-weight ratio of 7.5 horsepower per ton. This was nearly 2 horsepower per ton less than the already incredibly slow Churchill Mark I, and the Churchill had thicker armour and was faster, and it was slightly more than half of the power-to-weight ratio of the not terribly mobile Tiger. The disastrously bad mobility, terrible even by 1930 standards, wasn't seen as a problem by the design committee because this tank was supposed to fight over trenches. And if World War II had bogged down into the kind of trench warfare that characterised the First World War, that would have been fine. The problem was, nobody had bothered to consult the Germans. And in the ultimate stroke of irony, German tank commanders like Heinz Guderian, for example, who pioneered the Blitzkrieg concept, actually got their ideas from a book written by a British tank commander, Basil Liddell Hart. So that by the time the TOG II prototype was considered complete in 1941, it was already at least 30 years out of date. It had the firepower. Theoretically it had the armour, but it was so ridiculously slow and immobile that the frontal armour was rendered largely irrelevant. Not just because the Germans were starting to develop 75mm anti-tank guns that could deal with the frontal armour, but because of its practical immobility, it was child's play to outflank this machine and attack it from the more vulnerable sides and rear. Something that the Germans demonstrated they were quite capable of doing during Operation Barbarossa when they invaded Russia and came up against another very heavily armoured but underpowered tank, the KV-1, which no German anti-tank gun at the time was capable of penetrating, until they started pressing their 88mm flak guns into the anti-tank role and simply outflanking and bypassing the KV-1s and destroying them from the sides and rear at point-blank range. In other words, the TOG might have had the firepower, it might have had the armour, but its mobility was so incredibly bad it actually detracted from the armour's ability to provide any kind of survivability for the tank if it had been used in battle. Fortunately, the TOG was never expected to fight. Unfortunately for Storm and Normans here, he very much is. He is of course the last tank left alive on his team, and that Cromwell that he just destroyed was the 5th surviving enemy tank, which means there's a Kolobanov's medal up for grabs. The problem here is that all of his opponents, even the artillery and the KV-1S, can run rings around him. So he has to make them come to him, which is why he's positioned himself overlooking the base. They're trying to cap, they have to come to him. It looks like the KV-1S is using the 122mm howitzer fired by explosive shells rather than the 122mm anti-tank gun. And then, potentially, disaster strikes. The Hellcat's behind him. Fortunately, instead of continuing forward and getting into cover, the Hellcat, for some bizarre reason, decided that it was best to reverse very, very slowly right out into the middle of the open square. And there's the Crusader SP. I do have to say, it's very, very nice of the enemy team to all come at him one at a time. You know, where he can kill them with his superior DPM, rather than swarming him and coming at him from all sides at the same time, where he would be at a distinct disadvantage. To be completely fair to the KV-1S, he is at least backing off while he reloads rather than doing what you see so many people trying and failing to do when faced with a TOG, and sit in front of them chewing on multiple 17-pounder shells while they wait for their derp guns to reload. KV-2 drivers in particular are often quite guilty of this, and that's something that makes the TOG happy in his pants. The KV-1S, however, is at least smart enough to not fall for that old gag. I'm just not entirely sure what he's waiting for now that he has definitely reloaded. Is he waiting for his teammate? Where's the P-43? Haven't seen him in a while. That's a very good question, actually, because the P-43 is not a slow tank. He was last spotted up here quite some time ago. Is he AFK? Has he flipped the tank? Crusader SP has just popped up behind him, so Normans takes the shot in his big fat ass while finishing off the KV-1S. And that one shot is all the Crusader SP is going to get. Now then, 5 minutes of this battle remaining. Still no sign of the P-43. 5 minutes, believe it or not, is not long enough for a TOG II to cross the map, get to the enemy cap circle, and win by capping out. Plus, we can't guarantee that that P-43 is AFK or has flipped his tank. He could just be very, very bad. And if a TOG is sitting in the middle of an open cap circle, broadcasting his position to anybody who's capable of thinking and breathing at the same time, and only has 300 health left, even if you are very bad, it's still not going to be difficult to kill him. You're guaranteed to get the first shot off. And with 5 minutes remaining, all the time in the world to relocate and finish the TOG off with the second shot, or even third if it becomes necessary. Here's the other thing though, if that P-43 is AFK, or has flipped the tank, Storm and Normans has 4 minutes to find him and kill him. And this is not a small map. And he's in a TOG. No point whatsoever in trying to head for the enemy cap circle. The best thing he can do is at least head to the location where the P-43 was last spotted and pray that he is AFK or has flipped the tank over. Because he must find and kill the P-43 in order to win this map and add a Kolobanov's medal to his existing Top Gun. If the P-43 is not AFK or has not flipped the tank, then he could relatively easily kill Storm and Normans. Also, if he's not AFK and has not flipped the tank, he could be anywhere, not necessarily anywhere near the position where he was last spotted. He could be hooking around the southeastern end of the map in order to try to attack Storm and Normans from the rear in the position where he was last spotted, in which case this is going to be a draw. The P-43, however, is still in the location where he was last spotted. He is not AFK, and he has not flipped the tank. At first I thought, that's a bot, isn't it? Just aimlessly driving around, pointing the turret towards the first enemy tank that pops up on the minimap. And that seemed like the most likely explanation. But it quickly became apparent that's not a bot. Bots don't typically side scrape an angle. That's an actual player. He's just really, really bad. Now, Jingles, come on, you don't know anything about the person driving that P-43. They could be 5 years old for all you know. They could be somebody with severe learning difficulties. Oh, absolutely. That's probably a more likely explanation. There could be any number of perfectly good reasons as to why the P-43 was derping around this end of the map instead of being useful while the rest of his team were dying to Storm and Normans. But that doesn't mean he's not bad. That just explains why. So, a glorious victory for Storm and Normans in the TOG II. As well as the Kolobanov's medal, he also got a steel wall, and we're going to be examining that one in particular detail in just a moment, to go with the high caliber and Top Gun, and of course, Ace Tanker badge. Nearly 3,600 damage done to go with his 7 kills, which would be a decent amount of damage to do in a tier 10 battle, let alone a tier 7 game, where the various different tanks have half of the available health. I was happy to note that the scumbag M12 finished up exactly where he deserved, right at the bottom of the team list. His only contribution to this battle was to badmouth his team in chat at the beginning, and then kill himself, although I still think he earned 233 more experience than he deserved. And I was very surprised to see that the P-43 technically wasn't even the worst player on the enemy team. He managed to outperform a Crusader and a Super Chaffee, although not by much, which is quite baffling because the Super Chaffee did at least manage to do some damage and neither the P-43 nor the Crusader did. In fact, the P-43 only fired his gun 4 times during the course of that entire battle, which is quite an achievement for somebody who managed to survive right until the dying seconds of the match. The one thing that I have absolutely no explanation for is how the hell does a machine as overpowered as an E-25 in a Tier 7 battle manage to score less than 200 experience? That one, I'm afraid, I just have no possible explanation for. But the final thing that I wanted to cover before we put this particular battle to bed is the Steel Wall Medal that Storm and Normans received. In order to earn a Steel Wall Medal, you must, and I quote, receive more potential damage than any player on your team, at least 1,000 hit points, and survive. You must also receive at least 11 hits. Well, as you can see, Storm and Normans did receive the required 11 hits, and his armour blocked one of them. It was the 1,560 health that he started with that gave him that Steel Wall Medal. It had nothing to do with his vain attempts to angle his armour or the actual thickness of the armour on the tank. And that's just one of the many reasons why I absolutely adore the TOG II, because it is shit. But providing the enemy team are just slightly more shit, it's shit in all the right ways. Storm and Normans, congratulations on a glorious victory. Everyone else, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.